Hey folks, how you doing? Dave McRae here. Okay, so a couple of days ago, several days ago, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, whatever it was now. Okay, it was just over the weekend at least. Jason Blum did an interview with, I believe, comingsoon.net, where he talked about a couple of things, but he mentioned that, yes, John Carpenter is heavily involved in this new Halloween film. And I believe what this article was supposed to do was supposed to sort of, ease everybody's mind on, thinking that John Carpenter just came back for a paycheck, right? Because if you know John Carpenter's relationship to the Halloween films and the Halloween franchise, and if you're familiar with my past videos, you know that, and you can YouTube this shit on your own, you can actually see him saying when asked, so what do you think of the Halloween series and the franchise and the films? And he basically says, I don't give a shit. A great thing happens. I sit on my ass, I extend my hand, and a check falls in my fucking hand. It's great. So you know that he's sort of been this disgruntled old kind of guy, rightly so, if you know some of the shit that he's been through. But he didn't really care. So when news broke in April or May of 2016, I think it was April or May, somewhere around there. Anyway, it was 2016 that John Carpenter was coming back to executive produce the new Halloween film. People were losing their shit. They were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Holy snap. But the problem is that a lot of the average moviegoers, maybe you're some of them, maybe you're not, maybe you're somebody like me who actually works in the industry. The problem is in the wording executive producer. Now, I'm not going to get into huge in-depth detail on what an executive producer is. You can look it up if you want. But I'm going to sort of compartmentalize my thoughts and really what John Carpenter's role here is. Because I read the article and there was nothing new. There was no new information. Jason Blum didn't really say anything. And if you dissect the quotes that were used in the article as evidence that John Carpenter is heavily involved and evidence that, yes, he's not coming back just for the paycheck. He really wanted to be here. When you actually look at it objectively and you sort of analyze it, you realize, yeah, this is just common sense. Jason Blum didn't really say anything. And we'll go over it. But first I want to start here. So executive producer. What is an executive producer? Well, by and large, now this can change, okay? Because we live in the day and age now where actors are writing, writers are acting, producers are directing, directors are producing, cinematographers are doing music guys are directing. I mean, it seems like parts are interchangeable. Now, there are certain roles and certain rules that are in place. And the unions make sure, whether it's the Directors Guild, whether it's the Writers Guild, whether it's SAG-AFTRA, whatever the case is, they make sure that these rules are implemented and followed. But that being said, there's a lot of gray area now, and a lot more gray area than there ever was before, way back in the 50s and the 60s and, back in the studio system era, where actors and writers and directors worked for specific studios only, and they could only do movies that were produced and released by these studios. We're not in that age anymore. So, by and large. So that being said, let me just take a swig of water here, because this is fucking intense. So John Carpenter's coming back to executive produce the new Halloween film. That was the news. An executive producer, by and large, is not somebody who's on the set every day. He's not somebody who's there. Okay, now that doesn't mean he or she can't come down to the set. No, of course they can. But by and large, they are somebody who is the studio's representative, okay, for the production. They are in charge of the overall production. They are making sure that it comes in on time, that it comes in on budget. Maybe they're even the person responsible for raising the funds or finding the financing, knowing the connections, making the phone calls, doing this, that, and the other. They are in charge of making sure the film comes in on time, on budget. Everything is running smoothly from a financial standpoint. They are the official studio representative. The producer is the one who is more hands-on and is more there every day on set, handling things, making sure things are running smoothly. They are sort of, they answer to the executive producer. The director is the one that is in charge of the day-to-day activities that are happening in the course of the creative on set, right? With the actors and the actresses and the director of photography and the set and the lighting, and it's his or her film, right? What you see transpire is his or her film. But They often have a producer breathing down their neck that sometimes have creative differences, the producer sometimes has an executive producer breathing down his or her neck because they're coming from the studio. Do you know what I mean? Now, with independent productions, that can change. Often directors like me, right? I'm an independent filmmaker. So I not only write and direct my films, I finance my own film. So I act as an executive producer as well, which is great because I don't have anybody breathing down my neck, except for myself and maybe people who are annoyed with me on set. But anyway, that being said, so knowing that this is a low budget horror film for all intents and purposes, okay, it's probably going to be between a $5-10 million film would be my guess. Maybe a bit more, maybe when you factor in marketing. But I was thinking about this and I'm thinking, so he's coming back as an executive producer. Well, what does this mean? Okay, and I always knew that it probably means that it's a creative consultant. That's what it really means, by and large. But the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, doesn't recognize creative consultant as an official credit. Okay, they don't recognize that as an official credit. So in other words, you got to go through a ton of legalities and loopholes and meetings and shit like that to actually credit somebody on screen in the credits as a creative consultant. They don't like that. Okay, they don't like that. So usually creative consultants are often disguised as executive producers. Not all the time, okay, not all the time. But that's what I think is happening with John Carpenter here. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't have any sort of executive producer role. I'm not saying that. But by and large, he's an older guy. He doesn't give a shit. He's come back. He's like, okay, we'll get this back on track. So in other words, you can't give John Carpenter a creative consultant credit because they wouldn't be allowed to do that. So they bring him on as an executive producer, not a producer, because a producer has to be more hands-on, has to be more involved in the day-to-day of the production. An executive producer can offer their thoughts and sit back and do nothing. Do what John Carpenter does. A great thing happens. I sit back, I offer a few pieces of advice, and a check falls in my fucking hand. An executive producer role for John Carpenter on this new Halloween film is perfect for John Carpenter in 2017 because he doesn't give a fuck. You know what I'm saying? He's saying all the right things. I have no doubt that he does want the film to be good and that he does want the film to go back to its roots and he does want the film to succeed. Absolutely, unequivocally. Of course. But his role on the film, he doesn't want to come back and he's done this. He's done this for his whole life. He's done this and he's done this back in 1978 with the original Halloween and 1981's Halloween 2. He's done this. He has no interest in coming back and playing a more active role in this new film, hands-on, on the ground, boots on the ground kind of thing, right? So what do they give him? They give him an executive producer role where he can sort of wait in the wings, fly off somewhere, do phone calls, yeah, sure, that sounds good. And he doesn't have to put any real effort in terms of being there and being a part of the production. He's a creative consultant. That's what he is. But they want to give him the executive producer role for that reason, but they also want to give it to him for marketing, okay? Because when the movie comes out this time next year, those TV ads, those trailers, they're going to be pumping John Carpenter's name out there. Executive producer, John Carpenter. John Carpenter is back. And they can't do that with the creative consultant credit. They can't. They're not allowed to do that. So what do? They give him an executive producer credit, and that way they can pump it on all your screens to help market the film. That Carpenter is back. He's executive producing this movie. And the average moviegoer doesn't even know what executive producer is. They just see executive producer. Ooh, executive. That's usually somebody very important in some corporate role. He's an executive. Oh, yes, he's an executive. And he's a producer. And producer means they produce things. They create things. They produce things. And he's an executive producer. Oh, wow, so that must mean he's really important. Well, yes, it can. It can. But it can also mean that you're sitting your ass on your couch just taking phone calls and going, yeah, that sounds fine. You know what I mean? And yeah, okay, yeah, Bob, yeah, you know what, I know this guy Bob that might be able to set you up with a couple of million. Yeah, here's Bob's number, 555-6321. There you go. Boom. He's an executive producer. You know what I'm saying? So you have to take what Jason Blum, is saying here with a grain of salt. Here are the exact quotes. He explained to comingsoon.net, "We don't take any big steps without his approval." John Carpenter. So, for instance, hiring David and Danny, he approved. Okay, well, All right. He approved their pitch. He approved their first script. He's approving bringing back Jamie Lee Curtis. So anytime we make a big creative turn, he's involved with that, and we don't do it without his blessing. Now, the average moviegoer, and even a hardcore Halloween fan, would read that and think, oh my God, this is amazing, so he's heavily involved with all the big creative decisions. No, that's not what it says. Okay? It doesn't say that. It says, so anytime we make a big creative turn, he's involved with that, and we don't do it without his blessing. What that tells me is a big creative turn is something that would fundamentally change the path of the story, okay? Something that would fundamentally change the identity of the film, okay? The pacing of the film, the outcome of the film, okay? Not all the tiny nuances that layer the film together in between. You have to remember, this is a script written by David Gordon Green and Danny McBride. This is a film directed by David Gordon Green. This is not going to be a John Carpenter film. David Gordon Green is not going to be there just basically doing what John Carpenter wants him to do. He wants to put his own identity on the film. He wants to put his own, sort of stamp on this entire movie, and so does Danny McBride, right? What they're doing is they're using John Carpenter as guidance. They're saying, hey, what do you think of this? And if it's something monumental, something really big that could change the course of the entire series or the franchise or what Michael Myers is or what Laurie Strode is or a big casting decision or something like that, yeah, they'll turn to him and they'll say, hey, John, we're thinking of doing this. What do you think of that? And he'll give his stamp of approval or not. But I can guarantee you that John Carpenter is also somebody that is probably saying, hey, look, guys, here's what I think. This is what I think you should do, but ultimately, this is your film. You've written this. You're directing this. You're producing this. Here's what I think you should do. As an executive producer and as a creative consultant, this is what I think you should do because I think it's better for this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, you have to make that decision. Now, will they? Yes, I think they will. I think if Danny McBride wants to do this that way, and David Gordon Green wants to do this that way, and Jason Blum wants to do this that way, and all of the other producers and maybe even the actors want to do this that way, I can guarantee you they're going to do this that way, regardless of what John Carpenter says. Okay, they're going to heavily weigh what he said and take into consideration what he said, but at the end of the day, this is a David Gordon Green directed movie. That doesn't mean they're ignoring what he says, but I just think that this article is sort of painting it black and white, and I don't think it's black and white like that. I think there's many shades of gray, and here's another example. Now, this quote is sort of trying to ease everybody's fears that John Carpenter came back for no other reason than money, right? Here's the second quote from Jason Blum. We went to him and asked him to be involved. There was no contractual, financial, or any other obligation to have him on this movie. We went back and asked him to join us again. Now, at face value, you read that and you think, oh, that sounds really good. So John Carpenter came back because he wanted to come back. Yeah, that's what that means. Well, yes, that's what it means at face value, but let's break it down. Because nothing is really said here. Jason Blum doesn't really say anything that isn't obvious. Look, John Carpenter is 69 years old. Okay, he's not doing anything right now. Okay, do I believe they paid him handsomely for his return? Absolutely, because they're using him as a marketing tool more than anything. And that's not to diminish his role. That's not to diminish who John Carpenter is and all the wonderful films he's brought to us over the years. I'm looking at this objectively. I'm looking at this realistically. I'm looking at this from the filmmaking perspective. I'm telling you right now, he is more of a creative consultant than anything at all. Because if John Carpenter was really heavily involved in the movie, he would be a producer with boots on the ground. He wouldn't be an executive producer. He would come on, he'd be there on set, and that doesn't mean he's not going to be on set. He could show up and get his picture taken with Jamie Lee Curtis, which would be great marketing, right? You know what I'm saying? He'll probably show up on set if they're shooting down the street from him, which they probably will if they're going to shoot in Pasadena and West Hollywood. But I'm telling you right now, there's nothing to see here. Okay? Of course he wasn't financially obligated to come back. Of course he wasn't contractually obligated to come back. It's not like he's been under contract for 40 years and somebody said, hey, John, if we make a movie in 2018, by law, you have to come. Well, no, of course he wasn't contractually obligated to come back. He was only contractually obligated once he put his signature on the dotted line, right? So if somebody came to him and said, this quote is saying nothing. It's not saying anything, okay? It really isn't. And if you know what an executive producer is and what their role is and what their duties are and what John Carpenter is and how he feels about the Halloween series and what he's really doing, if you know what an executive producer is, then you sit back and you go, yeah, that's probably because it's the perfect role for John Carpenter. He gets to sit on his ass, still hold out his hand, get a check popped in his hand, smoke a cigarette, and he gets to offer his advice. Whereas in the previous Halloween installments, right? Halloween 4, Halloween 5, Halloween 6, H2O, Resurrection, he was just sitting on his ass, extending his hand and getting a check. No one was asking for his creative input. But now that he's an executive producer, he gets to sit on his ass, hold out his hand, get the check, and give his input. And that's basically what's going to be happening here, in my opinion. That's not to say that they don't turn to him for the big creative stuff, but he's more of a creative consultant than he is an executive producer, per se. But they have to give him the executive producer role legally because they have to credit him. And it's a beautiful move because now this time next year, as I just mentioned a few moments ago, they can market his name on the posters. They can market his name on the television promos. They can market his name on the movie trailers. They can't do that legally with creative consultant because it's not a real title per se, according to the unions. So anyway, I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective and let you guys know that yes, this is exciting, but hang on, this isn't what you think. Okay, he's not going to be heavily involved in the day-to-day. It's exactly what they said right there. Read it again. He said that when there is a big creative turn, yeah, we'll turn to him and ask his opinion. But don't be fooled to think that if everybody else really likes it and John Carpenter doesn't, they won't do it. No. They're going to do it. If it fits the story, if it's right for the story, if it makes sense, if David Gordon Green and Danny McBride want to do it, they will do it. Unless there is something in the contract that says big creative decisions cannot be done without John Carpenter's approval, which would be just stupid because these are professional filmmakers are more than capable of making great, wise, creative decisions all on their own. Then I guess they couldn't. But that's not what it means. Okay, folks, this is more of a creative consultant position in the disguise as an executive producer to use John Carpenter's name to help market the movie. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that we need to keep things in perspective here. Anyways, comment below and let me know your thoughts on that. My next video will be about Karen Strode, Judy Greer. If you want to join me on Facebook, you can. Facebook.com/manythingsdave McRae. McRae is MCRAE. Many Things Dave McRae. Also, Tuesday, October the 31st, 2017, join me live here on this channel at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will be watching Halloween 1, John Carpenter's original classic from 1978. You won't be able to see it, of course, but you'll be watching me watch it. And I'll have the chat room open, and I want you guys to watch the film with me so we can chat about the film, and you can ask me all sorts of questions about Halloween or whatever the case is. Anyways, comment below and let me know your thoughts. I want to know. It's going to be totally awesome. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys soon. Cheers.